This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone, hope you're well. So yeah, a nice quiet weekend off of FPL. Nothing to worry about. Put your feet up and just roll into the forgotten game week of game week 28, the one before the blank. Just, there's nothing to worry about this week, is there, Sam? Well, that was the plan anyway. Instead, we come out of it with decisions to make, and for us, a podcast to follow up on our Go Cunha Mateta pod. Now, there's no Cunha or Mateta in the aftermath of the weekend's events. Sounds like there are actually some worries. Anyway, to discuss all of that and more, I'm joined as always by Sam. All right, mate? How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I was looking forward to a really chilled out, relaxing weekend. No Southampton to ruin my weekend either. So it was all looking really good. And then I start looking at the FA Cup scorelines and results and realised that actually the FPL universe has decided to throw yet another curveball. So I've been looking forward to this pod actually all day. I think we're going to chew the fat on a lot of pretty interesting topics. We've learned a lot about chip strategy, about the blanks and doubles to come. And of course, we've got quite a lot to go through with players as well. So should be a good show. I think we joked about it being 2 or 3 minutes long when we first were talking about this one. And then everything happened over the weekend. So we kind of cursed ourselves a little bit. In the meantime, though, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we'll start off with team updates, just a reminder really of how Game Week 27 went down for us. A calendar update after that. So we'll be talking about chip plans, what things have shifted in the last few days, 3 or 4 days or so. How have they all changed? And then, of course, Cunha and Mateta both looking like they're going to be out. Cunha definitely, almost certainly Mateta as well, at least for Game Week 28, leading to decisions needing to be made for managers who are either going through the blank in Game Week 29 with transfers or using a chip, that being the free hit in Game Week 29. Plus, routes opened up now by Cunha being out for a little while, a good stretch of fixtures, followed by best transfers. Should we consider triple captaining Salah if you've still got it already for Game Week 28? And of course, looking at our teams going into Game Week 28, which doesn't look quite as secure as they might have done 48, 72 hours ago. But that's what keeps it exciting, right, Tom? We're on, what is it, Tuesday, the 4th of March. Only 2 game weeks, interestingly, in March, that being this weekend coming in the weekend after, before the first international break of 2025. It's felt like a while, and hopefully in that one we won't get as many injuries and suspensions as we did in this little mini break. Shall we start off with team updates? Or Tom, did you have something to mention before we did?
Yep, just to mention, FPL meets this weekend. London, the Thirsty Bear in Waterloo, starting from midday with all of the televised games being shown, as well as 20% off food and drink if you attend. Should be a great day out. It's been a while since I've been to one, actually. But I've got a pass to go after putting in the hours this week, and my partner was a bit unwell. So, of course, I capitalised on that and did full-on dad duty. This is normal stuff, isn't it? You do that anyway. But I was just like, oh, you know what? Yeah, maybe I can stay out for a bit longer. And she's like, yeah, all right. So, yeah, really looking forward to it. I'll try to remember to eat dinner this time, though, rather than running off as a drunken wreck around 7 p.m. like on the final day of last season. Be loved to see and meet as many listeners as possible. if you're in the area, do come along and find me. If you're coming alone, you absolutely should, even if you're thinking about it. FPL, as I've mentioned several times in the past, is a great leveler. You can get chatting really, really quickly, and I can assist in getting you introduced to everyone and everything like that. So it should be a really good turnout. But Sam, I hear you can't make this one, but you'll be there at the end, won't you, in 38?
Yeah, for sure. I never missed the Game Week 38 one. Sadly, I've got a birthday party to go to this weekend, so I can't make this one. But I figure that the next one will be the finale in 38, and I will try my best to make sure that one is available, barring some sort of act of God.
Yeah, see your train station being flooded again or something.
Yeah, wouldn't be the first time. In the meantime, though, shall we have a look and remind ourselves about the Game Week reviews from Game Week 27, Tom?
Yeah, it feels like a long time ago, doesn't it? But
Does.
the Cole Palmer debacle
Fiasco.
is fresh in mind. I think we definitely got away with it, didn't we?
You know what? I think Salah captain's got away with it, genuinely. If you played those games in reverse, I think Palmer was the more unfortunate not to get something. The XG was higher, the chances were humongous, and I think if you'd gone into the Palmer game already knowing that Salah got 6, you would have been extremely disappointed to come away without a Palmer haul. So I think it's a matter of perspective. Obviously, Salah did beat him, got the assist, and I think barring a few outside of the boot crosses rather than maybe taking a touch and playing on the other side, although we know how good he is playing that ball, so maybe I shouldn't complain too much. Salah could have gotten more, but Palmer definitely could have either way. So I don't think there was a massive disparity, I suppose, in the decision making. I don't think there was one poor decision, one good one. I just think on the day, Salah happened to get the assist, played really well, and Palmer just wasn't able to finish his dinner. And it could have gone the other way, or it could have been a bigger swing towards Salah. So in the end, not really much damage done. Looking at my team in particular, 53 points, a small red arrow, but having seen that Palmer had already blanked, and knowing that Salah was yet to play, I would have definitely shaken your hand and said, okay, 20,000 place red arrow by the end of this game week probably would have been acceptable, knowing the results from the first set of games. Cliver and Pedro softened the damage a little bit on that first, I think it was the Tuesday night. Pedro getting the penalty and Cliver with an absolutely scintillating strike. Other than that, Gabriel and Trent getting points in my back line. Robinson coming off the bench, getting yellow carded, wasn't exactly ideal. And of course, Cunha blanked before he got his suspension going into game week 28. What else? Mbermo with an assist, I think. That's pretty much it. 53 points, nothing too exciting. But we lived to fight another day. It wasn't a majorly bad game week for me.
No, same here. So it's 8k red with the 56 I managed in the end. Different from you, I had Raya in goal, so I got double clean sheet from Arsenal. Has got the assist at the back rather than Robinson. I think that was the main difference really, with Dango, who came off the bench for Isaac, matching your Semenyo. Marmouche did nothing, and yeah, the rest you own. The only kind of slight downer is this is the week I actually did say, all right, I'm going to buy Cunha and get that sorted out. By doing that, obviously I bought in a player I now have to probably sell again either this week or next week. And also, by doing that, I didn't let the 6 points of Mikhlenko off my bench. So I'm a few points down, actually, and a transfer down from doing that. But I wasn't to know, obviously, that Cunha was going to lose his head. So, yeah, all okay. 8k red down to 230k from 222. I mean, as you said, Sam, you're absolutely right that if you just imagine the game week in reverse or imagine Palmer versus Salah in reverse, actually, I'd feel a lot worse. Like this way, at least feels like kind of you've kind of gotten away with it. I suppose that's kind of what I meant. But yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. And yeah, I mean, I've got no regrets about the decision, apart from the outcome, which again wasn't that punishing. So yeah, onwards and upwards we go towards the blank, and this was going to be the forgotten week. But the fixtures definitely did start to cause a few ramifications, I guess, for FPL managers to keep in mind. So, I mean, what do all the FPL results, the FA Cup results, mean for FPL? And this FPL pricey fella, who I hear is quite good, he reminds me of somebody else. I don't know who. I can't place him, but he did a really good video on Monday about this. So, I mean, Sam, from watching that video, what have you learned from FPL pricey, this genius that whose name eludes us, but whose identity eludes us both?
I mean, he sounds like a right arsehole to me, Tom. I don't know why you're even watching him. Okay, so game week 34 is the crucial one that I focused on in the video. Obviously, the FA Cup results help us to paint a bit of a picture as to which teams are most likely to get to the semi-final. The quarter-final will be played after game week 29, before game week 30. That's really important, and I'll come back to why in a moment. But the teams that get to the semi-final of the FA Cup will most likely need their fixture being moved from game week 34. That's because the FA Cup semi-finals are played in that little window in game week 34. Now, on screen, if you're listening to the pod, don't worry, I'll map out the fixtures. I'm sure you've seen it everywhere, so I won't dwell on it too long. But the game week 34 fixtures, in which both sides are already out of the FA Cup and therefore the fixture is confirmed as going ahead, are Liverpool versus Spurs, Chelsea Everton, Wolves Leicester, and now, interestingly, Newcastle Ipswich. It's interesting because Newcastle have, of course, got the double game week in game week 32. If either Newcastle or Ipswich had made it to the semi-final of the FA Cup, that fixture in particular would have very likely had to be brought forward to game week 33, giving Newcastle 2 double game weeks in a row. We now know that is no longer going to happen, and it does open up another chip strategy route that I'll explain at the end of this monologue. If we go into the fixtures at risk, we've still got 6. The only one with both teams still in the FA Cup are Man City and Aston Villa. That is obviously now the most likely fixture to get pushed from game week 34, and due to Champions League involvement for Villa now in particular, it's more likely that that fixture has to get moved forward to game week 33. The other fixtures on screen, that being Arsenal, Crystal Palace, Bournemouth, Man United, Brighton, West Ham, Nottingham Forest, Brentford, and finally Southampton, Fulham, all have one team remaining in the FA Cup. Should any of those respective teams get through to the semi-final, then those fixtures would almost certainly have to get cut from game week 34. I think there's a very small window where they could feasibly keep it in there, but it's much more likely that it gets brought forward to game week 33, or in some isolated cases, pushed back. Now, the most likely fixture of those 6 that gets pushed backwards rather than forwards is Nottingham Forest Brentford. The reason for that is because the fixture schedulers have already made it very difficult for the Forest game to be brought forward to 33 because of the timing, that being the Monday evening for Nottingham Forest's previous game week 33 fixture. So it makes it too tight to basically fit it into game week 33. So that wraps up basically which teams are most likely to be blanking or doubling in game week 33 and 34. And those, obviously, the top 4 fixtures on screen now are the ones that you can kind of just run through with those teams without having to necessarily worry about things like a free hit or having them in a double game week the week before. Finally, obviously, Crystal Palace is the other team that has a double game week in game week 32. If they get through to the semi-final, which all they now need to do is beat Fulham. If they beat Fulham, they'll get through to the semi-final, and then they have very likely got 2 double game weeks in a row, 32 and 33. That's another important point because it will shift some people's strategy, whether or not Newcastle and Crystal Palace can be maybe run through from 32 to 34, and free hitting in 33 potentially, or if Palace have double, you're obviously much less likely to want to free hit in one of those 2 double game weeks. Hopefully that makes sense. The final thing I wanted to quickly mention is the quarterfinal draw. Fulham versus Crystal Palace, I've already mentioned, is a pretty 50-50 tie. There's not a clear favourite there. Fulham will be home favourites, you would think, but Palace have already beaten them, as assistant manager users on Glasner will attest to. Preston at home to Villa won't be easy, but Villa will definitely be the favourites there. Brighton at home to Nottingham Forest, another really tight game to call. And then finally, Man City away at Bournemouth. Again, Man City are probably tournament favourites right now, but given that they're away at the Vitality, where Bournemouth have been very good, and Bournemouth have themselves been giant killers several times this season, I wouldn't put it past Bournemouth to get through that. So this is a really split draw, and it's going to be very hard to predict which sides are definitely going to be blanking in game week 34 and therefore doubling elsewhere. possibly outside of one of Villa or Man City. You'd back maybe one of them at least to get through to the semi-final, that making that Villa Man City fixture the most likely to get shifted.
Yeah, thanks for Sam. Really good rundown. And yeah, I think the main thing about the draw, which James noticed on James from Planet FPL noticed on his podcast, which I thought was a really kind of salient point, was that suddenly the FA Cup feels pretty open, and that also means that teams are going to actually be interested in playing their strongest teams in that, right? Especially if the league is probably a bit of a probably becomes kind of deprioritized a tiny bit, and that's going to have wider ramifications for double game weeks, especially double game week 33. Don't know how it's all going to land yet, but certainly that could mean that for double game week 33, when we're hoping to bench boost, we may not be finding that we're going to be getting all of those 15 out of 15 doublers, or however you want to kind of end up playing it. And you may find as well that, in the past we've gone, oh, you know what, it's great for big double game weeks earlier on in the season because it's more predictable who's going to be playing rather than 37. Maybe that's a bit misguided actually as a sentiment, and maybe actually the fact that you've got all these competing motivations surrounding cup competitions, and especially one where it's eminently winnable. The last kind of, apart from Man City, the last team to win one was Villa in the 1950s. James said, there's a chance to make history for a lot of these teams. The magic of the cup is still alive, as the BBC keep telling us every few weeks. So maybe that may well be something to keep an eye on, and maybe something to bear in mind with how you're setting up in later game weeks, especially 33. Maybe you shouldn't be in that 31, 32 wildcard piling in on the doublers, because you may well find that, a Salah with a single game week in game week in that week might be all right. A couple of Liverpool players in that week may be all right. They've got Leicester anyway. So, hey, that might outscore, piling in on teams who are going to have their attention elsewhere, basically. I suppose the main upshot of this, Sam, is that has your kind of chip planning changed, really, in terms of what's available? For me, probably not. So I've got my wildcard, bench boost, and free hit left. And it still feels like the vague idea is to wildcard in, I think, 32, just because I haven't got a triple captain left, and it gives kind of maximum scope for information. Bench boost in 33 and free hit in 34. That feels like what I'm going to do. It feels absolutely fine. And the rest of the season will be linked to how I come out, basically, of those 3 game weeks in terms of how risky I get in terms of the transfers that I make going on. So yeah, all done, dusted with my chips by 34. It doesn't feel like that's going to quite be the issue yet. If there is kind of a possible Armageddon, which can happen for a myriad of factors coming true, that game week 36 and 37 also elicits blanks, then I think it might be one of those you kind of just ride it out a little bit, unfortunately, because that's so hard to plan for. And the immediate blank in 34 with what I'm looking for. Obviously, the really immediate one's 29, but I think I'm on 10 players for that already, so I think it's probably all right. Any change for you? I suppose just triple captain, isn't it, really, given the fact that we're kind of mostly matched in what we're thinking about when we're doing bench boost and free hit.
Yeah, so the most likely plan that I will implement will be wildcarding in game week 31, hopefully after we've had those announcements on when the doubles and blanks will shift. Obviously, game week 30 comes very close on the heels of the FA Cup quarterfinal, so they might not have time to figure out exactly where all of these fixtures are going to move to. So 31 gives me that little bit of breathing room, and hopefully therefore the information that I'll require to make an informed decision. So wildcard 31 looks pretty set for me as it stands, although I am always flexible. The most likely route after that would be triple captain in game week 32. 33 is still likely to be a bigger double, so bench boost in that, and then free hit in game week 34 to cover off the differences between, obviously, the teams that are doubling in game week 33 are the most likely ones to be blanking in 34. Now, I will mention that there's a second route that I'm now at least keeping myself open to, which won't come really into play until I wildcard anyway, and by that point I will know. But depending on who wins out of Fulham and Crystal Palace, if Crystal Palace go out to Fulham, then it does open up a second route. The route for me would be wildcarding in 31 as normal, but then potentially using my free hit in game week 33 rather than 34 and loading up on more on players that can play in both 32 and 34. So if Palace went out, Newcastle are already out, they would have a double in 32 and then play at least in game week 34. So I could load up on 6 of those, and then straight away I only need 5 other players to cover me off to save me from the free hit in 34. And it means that the free hit used in 33 can be used in an aggressive manner rather than a defensive one. So that obviously hinges on one particular result going a certain way. And even so, it might still not work out as the best route, but it's an option that I'm at least leaving myself open to at this point in time, depending on what that result is. And luckily, I will know what that result will be by the time I wildcard. So I don't need to lock in any strategy yet.
Yeah, and then bench boost at the best possible opportunity other than that when everything looks good.
Yeah, sorry, I should have mentioned bench boost would then move forward to 32, where there's a lot of good fixtures as singles. So I would only have 6 doublers, but the depth on the bench would be much greater because like the players that I'd otherwise be playing would get relegated to the bench because of the doublers, if that makes sense. And I'd be wildcarding the week before, so I'd optimize for it. So yeah, and then it would be triple captain that probably gets weakened, possibly for a double game week later on in 36. But even if that doesn't occur, I've still got Haaland up against Southampton, which I know is a triple captainable fixture. So I can do that later on in the season if I really needed a backup option. But yeah, it's one of those two plans as it stands.
Yeah, no, sounds good. Okay, excellent. Well, so it all falls basically. Right, on to the main sort of thing this week. So Cunha, Mateta, injuries in the forwards. Many names for this pod. The irony that we initially named the pod after these two talisman 2 weeks ago, and now they're potentially on the way out, regardless of your route through 29. It's not lost on us. We were initially joking last week, as you mentioned, Sam, about how we might not have much to say on this pod. You know, Royal transfer, see you later. But Forgotten Game Week 28 took that personally, didn't it? Cunha, head loss, absolutely banged to rights. No apology letter is going to be accepted this time. Out for the next 4 at the very least. An additional ban probably incoming too for refusing to leave the field. And Mateta, Glasner said that he's out versus Ipswich, according to Athletic, and will only be back when he's physically and psychologically ready. Redolent of Raul Jimenez's post after injury versus Arsenal in November 2020. There was a fair gap before he came back for obvious reasons. Obviously, severity of what happened to Mateta is lower, but there's still going to be some lingering impacts from such a terrible, in inverted commas, challenge. And it impacts both forks in the road, really. We discussed this at the time, but it does mean that there's a lot to now think about again, especially when it comes to forwards. And I think that most people are going to be touched by one of these players being out, given the way the market was shifting before this game week's, this weekend's FA Cup action. Obviously, lots of things happen. It's worth flagging, including European competitions this week. So don't make any transfers until Friday, please, especially given the fact that these hamstrings are going like anyone's business, as well as kind of players losing their heads and getting kicked in the face. On screen, we've got, if you're watching on YouTube, we've got a data for a collection of forwards, including Haaland, showing their price, the next 4 non-pen goals and assists, if they're over and underperform data, same as not very long ago. And also, as far as I could tell, if they're on pens or not. But I might be wrong. I was just using basically a few sites to see what they said. As I said, this won't become familiar as we looked at this not very long ago. So yeah, a few sort of impacts, I guess, of these two forwards being out. Regardless, it feels like, Sam, that Cunha's just get rid at some point before 29, and even if you're free hitting, is probably getting rid of him this week and taking the punt. Mateta is more one that if you can hold it, if you plan to free hit in 29, maybe it's worth keeping. I mean, how would you view these two?
So I'll start off with Cunha because he's the player in my team. So perhaps I've done more thinking on him. So with Cunha right now, I think he is an almost certain sell, but I don't think you necessarily have to do it this week. It completely depends on what everyone else's front 7 is. But in some cases, you might be able to bench him for a week. And the reason for that logic would be to wait the week and then sell one of Salah or Palmer to make the funds available to upgrade Cunha all the way to Haaland. Now, that option isn't really open to us in Game Week 28 because, let's face it, Salah and Palmer both have incredibly good fixtures. And as poor as Palmer's been in terms of outcome, I think it would take a very brave person to get rid of Palmer ahead of Leicester, considering how bad they've been recently as well. And nobody is getting rid of Salah. That's just simple. So not many people are going to have the money to upgrade Cunha to Haaland this week. But if you could leave him on a bench for a week and still have a decent enough front seven or front six with a back four, then maybe there's an argument to do so. Personally, for me, I think he's more likely to go because I've still got a future route to Haaland. Again, you don't have to go for Haaland next week either, but if he was appealing to you, you might still want to get rid of Cunha this week. Again, this is for a non-free hit strategy, of course. And there are a few other options in this sheet that I like the look of. Most of them are budget as well. Like you can easily get to them with one free transfer. Marmoush is a little bit more expensive, so is Chris Wood, but as long as you've got 0.3, 0.4 in the bank, you can get to either of them. Or if you wanted to go cheap, my two preferences right now are Wissa at 6.4, with not the best next two fixtures, but certainly not the worst next two, especially as Villa are playing in the Champions League either side of their Brentford fixture in game week 28. And then, of course, you've got Beto with two very good fixtures, Wolves and West Ham in the next two, followed by a severely tougher patch of fixtures from game week 30 onwards. So he's much more of a short-term bet, but he is also much cheaper. So if you can wait a week, I'd wait for Haaland. But if you have to make the move now, I think if you wanted to go cheap, Wissa or Beto makes sense. But personally, I'm eyeing up someone who has caused me a lot of punishment this season. And I think he was going to be in my game week 29 anyway. That's Chris Wood, and just get him in 1 week early, regardless of the fixture, and just say, you know what, enough's enough.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So a couple of fun facts. Mateta is the top bought-in player this week so far. 200,000 transfers in. Cunha's third, 150,000 transfers in. Cunha's also the most sold player this week, 250,000, near enough transfers out. Mateta's the fourth most sold. I don't think we've ever seen that before, where you've got two players in the top five bought and sold. Absolutely incredible. But I think, Mateta especially losing out through no fault of his own, it's a real shame really, because he's leading over the last six, the underlying data for forwards, with the six non-pen goal involvements, and slightly overperforming that, but he's top for non-pen XGI over the last six as well, more than Haaland. So really lighting up the league, and it's a real shame that hopefully he'll be back to Southampton, hopefully all is well with him. Cunha himself performing in a very kind of otherwise underwhelming Wolves team, proper kind of personification of the talisman, and kind of the upshot of this is, I've got Mikalenko, and if I've got loads of injuries now, so he's going to have to play anyway, but if not, he was in a real shout, because Wolves, ironically given their name, probably going to be toothless about Cunha. It was very much kind of their attack consisted of Mateus Cunha, that was it. And as you say, a lot of kind of the upstream, in the downstream impacts of that are where you go with this and what you do. And yeah, probably a Wissa or a Wood, if you can go up that far from Cunha. It's 0.3, I think the difference is at the moment. Absolutely fine to do. Chris Wood, Man City at home, Ipswich away. I reckon that's going to be a fairly popular captain shout actually in the blank. Man United at home, Villa away. None of those fixtures from an attacking point of view should worry you that much. Chris was still overperforming the most of all the strikers that I've got listed in front of us. But you mentioned, of course, that a route to Haaland does actually open up for you, especially if you've got Cunha, you've got Palmer hanging around, and you've maybe got Trent too. All of those players can be used as sacrificial lambs to make up that 14.7 million difference to buy in Erling Haaland. This was a route that I never thought about, because obviously there's no way I was selling Cunha before Southampton away in 29. But there is a way through now, and the carrot of game week 30 versus Leicester at home essentially being a big differential captain for those going that way. I mean, don't underestimate the fact that Mo Salah is going to have massive EO for an awfully long time, even now. That there will be a shift towards Haaland at some point, I'm sure, given the Man City's kind of end of the season fixtures, and plus the fact they've got no Europe. But I think we will still see that there are going to be a couple of occasions where you can really take on Salah. Obviously, in 29, there's no opposition. I think the main opposition will be Chris Wood when Haaland's got Brighton at home. But after that, in the Leicester game, Liverpool have got the Merseyside derby, so Everton at home that day. But yeah, Haaland versus a hapless Leicester at home. I think I can't remember how many. Yeah, he hasn't. I can't remember how many he scored when he played them earlier on in the season. Whether it was during his fallow period or whether he was still on fire then, I can't remember at this moment in time.
You keep going, I'll check.
Yeah, and elsewhere, I think the other one who I think is going to become fairly popular is my man Marmoush. He just perhaps becomes popular by default almost, because if you can't reach Haaland and you've kind of got quite a tightly structured team. Marmoush seems okay. Like, he didn't play in the FA Cup versus Plymouth, so that would imply that he's maybe in the kind of Pep's best 11 right now. I think that it's really interesting what they're trying to do with Haaland and him. Haaland kind of creating the space and Marmoush kind of running in behind. Did, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago in the shakedown of Marmoush, that sort of thing did happen a little bit at Frankfurt as well in the Bundesliga when he was playing with Ekatike. Obviously scored a hat-trick. Since then has been just mostly ex-Lively, but he hasn't really kind of done anything other than that kind of the hat-trick a couple of weeks ago. So lots of stuff that is kind of occurring. Most should have perhaps kind of deep squads still as well. So I think, Sam, maybe rolling it through this week, free hitting or making a transfer in 29 is obviously an option to take, but there are injuries. So the likes of Lewis Hall, who many of us were kind of counting on for this week and beyond. And there's something I spotted on Twitter earlier on, some Newcastle accounts that they'd seen Lewis Hall in a protective boot, was hobbling. They asked him, how long are you going to be out for? And he said, I don't know, mate, something like that. So, it is a bit worrying, especially they said the club often kind of comes out and gives an injury update pretty quickly, and the longer their silence, the more they worry. So it could be something that kind of is worth keeping an eye on. But yeah, I mean, I think broadly that there are kind of loads of options on the table again, which is something we didn't expect this week. We expected to be kind of sat here thinking, yeah, I'm going to roll through. And Paul said in the chat earlier on that, even Isaac maybe, and we'll talk about Newcastle and Newcastle sell-off and the knee-jerk in a minute. But even Isaac is a player that, you could potentially be looking at losing. I know, Sam, he's your route, isn't he, to be buying in Haaland?
He is indeed, yeah. So I'm banking on Isak being okay for this week. Obviously, Eddie Howe's quotes after the game, we wouldn't ever normally read too much into them because he's usually not exactly honest with his words, especially so close after a game as well. He might not just simply know. But he did suggest that Isak wasn't an injury. He just felt a little bit of tightness and he didn't want to take a risk. But he also said before the game that whenever Isak's fit, or whenever any of these players are fit, it makes sense to play them because he'd prefer to have them match fit rather than wrapping them up in cotton wool and hoping that they'll get going for the final itself. So I still have a decent amount of hope in Isak being okay. Obviously, Lewis Hall is questionable, and the fact that he's went to see a specialist isn't a great sign. But what I would say about the protective boot thing is I've seen loads of footballers be just automatically put in the protective boot just as a precaution. And I think we saw it with Bruno Fernandes a couple of seasons ago where he was like, there was a picture of him on the sofa with a cast or a protective boot on, and he played 24 hours later. So do not read anything into that. What we should read into is what we hear from the ITKs over the next week or so, or over the next few days or so. And if we see him in any training pictures, then obviously the protective boot is not a problem and it's a much better sign. But I would suggest that Lewis Hall is pretty shaky for this weekend, at least, considering the next game after would be that Carabao Cup final. And if he's off to see a specialist, it doesn't sound great. So there's definitely worry there in both cases. And it gives us all some stuff to do this week, doesn't it? But Isak would be probably going for me in game week 29 anyway. I did question whether or not it was worth doing, considering I've got some sale value in him and I'd have to buy him back at a more expensive price. But I think he'll go down by 0.1, 0.2 anyway. And I've actually only already got 0.3 saved on him anyway. Okay. So it's not really that painful for me to get rid of him. And if it means that I can get to Haaland for that 2-game week stretch of Brighton and Leicester both at home, I quite like it, especially considering some of the midfielders I've got as options for a downgrade from Palmer as well. There are some pretty decent little differentials there. And I quite like the combinations that I'm able to come up with. So I think that's a double swap that I'm almost certain to make next week.
Yeah, it's fascinating how situational it all sort of kind of becomes now with which fork in the road you've gone down, and also your team situation and who you're willing to sacrifice, what you're willing to do. And for me, just to give my where I am with all of this is that I've basically got choices in Chris Wood and Erling Haaland. That's kind of what it is at the moment. Do I buy Chris Wood now? Or do I kind of just roll? I can, and we'll look at it later. I can probably just about get through this week with a fairly decent team, and then I could buy Haaland through selling Palmer for Nwaneri, who's on fire tonight by all accounts of us being 5-1 in the Netherlands, and also I'd have to sell Trent for a Gvardiol or below, maybe even kind of take Trent all the way down to Neco Williams, something like that, just with all the injuries that are in Man City's defence. So end up with kind of Marmoush and Haaland for a couple of games, which it could be no bad thing. I'm not entirely sure which one I'm going to go for, but I do like the idea, especially the big carrot for me is taking that risk in inverted commas on Erling Haaland at home for Leicester and captaining him in that game when I think that the crowd will still mostly be on Salah versus Everton. I think that kind of, if that goes well, that could be the sort of thing that could get me in the top 100k kind of by game week, around game week 30, which would be really nice. Doesn't go well, obviously. I'm kind of in the crap, but at this point with the rank around sort of 200k, that's the sort of risk I'm willing to take, really. So yeah, it's a tough decision really on this one, where you go with these players. With Mateta, it does feel like you can probably just about, if you can handle it this week, just stick with. But Cunha definitely does seem like a sell, and if you do need to get this week, I'm right behind you, Sam. That getting Chris Wood, just getting him in and forgetting about it, does seem like a pretty good pick up, especially with we've said the fixtures, but none of them worry anybody from an offensive point of view. Forest is still fairly decent, nothing to worry about there. But the prize of getting in the big man does, to me, seem, and keeping Salah as well at the same time. So a lot of people do have plans to buy Haaland, but they've got to sell Salah to get there. For me, being able to keep Salah and also get Haaland in, it does feel like a bit of a prize that I can kind of just keep. And plus, if I've got Haaland at 14.7, maybe towards the end of the season with the fixtures for Man City being so good, as Pep Guardiola would say, towards the end, I mean, maybe that's kind of the way to just do it and go about it. I just kind of absorb it this week. But yeah, a bit of a head scratcher, really, because we just didn't expect to be jolted into action, did we? This week, it was very much like a picture of tranquility. I had an idea that we would be kind of canvassing on X and on Blue Sky. How many transfers we rolled this season, and be talking about that rather than talking about this. But it's quite fun when these sorts of things happen. I kind of just want to mention Palmer here, because I've just kind of noticed in the chat there's a few people saying, I'm thinking of selling Palmer. I've sold Palmer already in the case of one person who shall not be named Rich. Paul in the chat saying, Palmer has decent fits after the blank, and it'd be typical if he returns to form after selling. And we've been a bit down on the idea of selling Palmer, I think purely because there were these two back-to-back games that he's currently got. He obviously had the Southampton game and didn't go well in terms of the outcome. Underlying data, different story. And Leicester up next as well. And I don't know, Sam, it feels like after this, that's the point where suddenly he becomes a little bit more liable to be sold. And after this point, you look through the fixtures for him, Haaland and Salah, and just think, you know what? I think that my captaincy is going to probably be fairly covered for the rest of the year with those two, right?
Yeah, I think so. And it's a little bit of a shame, really, because if you look objectively at Chelsea's fixtures after that game away at Arsenal in 29, Spurs at home, Brentford away, Ipswich at home as a 3 up to game week 32 is actually really quite nice. And you can see Palmer turning a corner in those fixtures. So I think it's only situational that probably will determine the fact that Palmer is the most likely of that trio to get sold off. I think Salah's done enough this season where it will just scare people too much to get rid of him, even if the fixtures aren't quite as good as the likes of Palmer. Salah's running at over 10 points a game at the end of the day, independent of fixtures and doubles, anything like that. Some managers will go without him, and good luck to you. And maybe I'll end up convincing myself that that's a good choice. But as it stands right now, I think I'd probably prefer to hold on to Salah alongside Haaland, who will obviously have the double game weeks and some great fixtures. That means sacrifices need to be made. And even if I get rid of Trent, which I am probably assuming I will do, I think Palmer probably still needs to be downgraded, and having all three of them, unless you've got an insanely good team value, is going to be pretty unlikely. So yeah, they've got decent fixtures up until, I would say, maybe game week 33, possibly even game week 34, but I don't really see in any game week in which you would captain him and with the other two premiums probably out ahead of him in most game weeks, he probably does get sold and left a little bit behind. But he'll score points. He'll do fine.
He will. It's almost like it's a good time to sell him, which sounds terrible, but it kind of is, just because everyone else will be doing that, and the kind of
Safety.
in terms of the pragmatically, you will see that the effective ownership week on week will diminish in terms of the pain. Game week 32, the Ipswich game was obviously a great game to be keeping them for. However, you've got Isaac, who's going to be the incontrovertible standout captain that week, assuming he's fit. So
and if not Mateta.
Yeah. So assuming he's fit. So,
Yeah.
I think we're probably kind of getting to the point now where, you've got to make a pragmatic decision. It might be that you look at City and still think, yeah, you know what, I think they're done for this year. But the end of the season fixtures for them are so standout that we've flagged for many, many weeks that I think it's hard for me to look past. I don't know whether I'll keep Haaland and Marmoush past my wild card, but I'm more than happy to be going with that going forward. I'm not sure about the defence though, mind, with the amount of injuries that they've managed to incur. And even if I was really interested in Guardiola, for example, but with Ake, Akanji, Stones, Diaz, all kind of having their respective kind of problems. Akanji's out for the season. Ake is out. Stones can't seem to keep fit. I think Diaz is coming back to fitness. There's a real chance that, for example, Guardiola's going to end up at centre back for quite a lot of those games. So he's only worth the premium if he's playing on the left. So it's one of those things that's kind of worth bearing in mind. But yeah, I think having the route to Haaland open through the Cunha injury is certainly kind of the biggest upshot for me from what we've seen. Problem is that I'm going to be without Chris Wood. I'm going to be at an FPL meets. Actually, no, I'm not, because it's the early game. So I'm not going to show up before that early game, or arrive afterwards when everyone's kind of gotten over it. Yeah.
And forgotten, hopefully.
Oh, I don't know, Sam. I feel like maybe I'll just go through this whole season without Chris Wood as a social experiment and see what happens. But yeah, I mean, I don't mind. If I do end up there, that's fine. I've still got Marmoush for the Leicester game, potentially. Like, if it wouldn't take much. So say Marmoush over Forest and Brighton does start to show a bit of form. If I go with Wood, then suddenly in the game week 30, I might be in a situation where I'm like, oh, actually, no, I'm fine with going for Marmoush, because Haaland's now creating the space for Mino's style, and Marmoush is the man who's getting beyond his countryman Mo Salah. So that may transpire, but yeah, I do think there's a massive carrot in going with Erling and taking this opportunity that's kind of fallen into my lap somewhat. I will have to take a hit to get there, but at this point, I'm not particularly bothered about doing such things. Another one, just to mention quickly, is Evan Nilsson. So Evan Nilsson came back to the team and scored in that madcap game against Wolves, and has been touted as one of the best cheap forwards out there, and by many accounts. Tom FPL Sponge said to me in the Cartel chat, aka the London Meets chat, that Evan Nilsson's going to have a few knock-on effects for Bournemouth as well. Something worth bearing in mind, especially if you've got characters like Dango and Clivert. Rotation between Clivert, Dango, Tavernier, and Brooks are all likely for two of the three attacking mid spots. Sponge, who's a Bournemouth season ticket holder, a big fan, says, and Semenyo is your man. Semenyo is the only nailed attacking asset now, but he says that Clivert and Dango are probably going to be first choice, but Dango might end up being kind of the guy who you're not too sure whether he's going to play in the wide berth or kind of be a bit of an impact sub. So there's going to be a few kind of knock-ons from Evan Nilsson, but Evan Nilsson was never a 90-minute man either, so he's probably not going to be one that I'm going to be running to. And I put a note on the chart in front of you that I didn't put his data in because he's been injured for so long, and it's irrelevant to go back to games from earlier on in the season or in 2024.
Yeah, true. Although there were promising signs with him earlier in the season. So if you're a more maverick or a more maverick manager or someone who doesn't mind taking that risk, then yeah, he could be interesting. I think probably, given I'm on double Bournemouth midfield and quite a lot of people already are pretty up to their eyeballs in Bournemouth players anyway, then he might not get that effective ownership, but might not be a bad bet either. So do you want to do a quick ranking of these in terms of who you would have as your Cunha Mateta replacement for similar or below?
Yeah, I think so. So we're taking Haaland. I think Haaland is such a, if you can get to him, try to get him. I know there's those people like, oh, I'm not interested in Haaland, full stop. But I think that there's a big prize on offer for a player like that and what he can do. I think number one is surely it's got to be Chris Wood. Annoyingly, God, I hate that man. But I think that I've talked myself even more into going without him for the rest of the season. But number one, the obvious pick, the keep it simple, stupid option is to go with Chris Wood if you can't get to Haaland. Number two for me is going to be very close between Visser and Marmoush. I think that the kind of the carrot of Marmoush having the Leicester game coming up, the Manchester derby, and also a very sort of inconsistent Brighton, even though they haven't lost that many games this season. A bit of a weird stat coming up. I'd probably go with Visser second. We've been noting for a long time that he's been statting very well, and he's the biggest underperformer in the data in front of us by quite a long shot, actually. For 3.49 non-pen XGI, only two non-pen goal involvement, so minus 1.49. So probably I'd go Wood 1, Visser 2, and probably Marmoush 3, just because Man City, even though they are floundering a lot this season, I mean, they're still fourth underlying team underlying XG this year, and they can only get better with the fixtures being better. So it could be one of those that kind of you shove him now, go for it, and then hey, you know what? 3 or 4 weeks down the line, he could be a really astute investment. So yeah, I'd probably go with those three. What about you?
Yeah, very similar. Definitely Wood out top for me and will likely be my transfer in this week if I needed to make it this week. After that, Visser, I think, would probably come in second. And just for a bit of fun, I'm going to add Beto in the mix there as well as a 5 million option. Very cheap, really good underlying data in the most recent few game weeks. Better than Marmoush's in terms of XG, although I will admit Marmoush would also be tempting. So those would be my top four, but I'm going to be different to you for the sake of it and upgrade Beto to that bronze medal place.
Okay, fine. So moving on to the game week preview then. The game week that we hoped never was, but actually will be. The knee-jerk best captains, best transfers and bold claims. Knee-jerk this week, I thought it was worth just homing in on the Newcastle assets and selling them. But in the Lewis Hall case, new information does seem to have come to light potentially about you cautioned against reading too much into what's been said, Sam, but certainly the whole gone to see a specialist thing, unless it's a Pep special one in Barcelona that injects them with all sorts of stuff, is probably going to be something to keep in mind. But Isaac, people are still kind of getting rid, and should have mentioned on the chart earlier on, but Isaac was actually bottom of the players that I was looking at, with two non-pen goal involvements over the last 6, just 1.55 non-pen SGI, so worse than everybody, including the likes of Delap and Muniz, who have barely played, and 0.45 overperforming as well. I mean, so I think there's something just to kind of touch on a little bit, which is that people are saying, oh, you know what, they've got their eyes on the Carabao Cup final, their head won't be in the game against West Ham, and there's definitely a bit of reading the tea leaves about this, I suppose. But there is a possibility that they'll all be playing protectively to ensure they're all fit for the Carabao Cup final. I don't think there'll be any rotation though. So I checked last time this happened, 22-23, when Newcastle went on to lose the Carabao Cup final to United. They played Liverpool 8 days before that, and 8 of the 11 who started the final also played the Premier League match. And there was one enforced change, which was that Karius played over Pope, who got sent off against Liverpool. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see kind of mass rotation. There are, as you signposted earlier on, Sam, doubles coming up for Newcastle. So long term, all kind of injury worries aside, I guess it does make sense to sort of hold them through, especially because Brentford comes up next in game week 30 after the blank, and they got Leicester in 31. So you want to get probably Isaac back if he's fit after that. But in the short term, there's definitely an opening, an opportunity for some jiggery pokery here, isn't there, Sam? That's something that it seems like you're going to be indulging in.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to that wildcard window. If people are wildcarding between game week 29 and 32, then it probably does make sense to look at getting rid of these players, as long as you don't have an astronomical amount of team value saved up in them. I've got, I think, about the same in both Isak and Hull. And Hall, because he's a defender, he's fairly cheap. I can just have him sat on my bench for a couple of weeks without it being an issue for me, even through the blank. Whereas there's a bit more upside in the attackers, and getting rid of Isak gets me to another extra striker that I really like the look of, that would be Haaland, of course. So I can get on board with getting rid of at least one of them. You could arguably get rid of both, but just bear in mind when you bought them and what value you've accrued in that amount of time, because they will be interesting come game week 32 onwards. If you're wildcarding, then obviously you can at least get them back in pretty easily without the transfers. But again, that team value will be important to you. So yeah, short term, I can definitely get on board with getting rid of one, maybe both of them, but just keep an eye on the future and make sure you're not basically snookering yourself when you get to 32 onwards.
Yeah, and no double in 33. It's one of those, isn't it, where it really depends on how the chips all fall, literally and figuratively in terms of FPL. And so it really does kind of feel like if you've got to kind of make the sacrifice to improve your prospects over the next couple of weeks, then it's something that's absolutely fine. I'm not sure whether I quite get behind Isaac not playing against West Ham. It doesn't seem like Howe has kind of dropped players, although admittedly Isaac and Wilson, there's a different situation back then. So Wilson played the Carabao Cup final. Isaac came on as a sub. But Isaac played against Liverpool. I didn't look into too much detail about who had played in what, just because I didn't have the time, frankly. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that you can look into. And as you say, a lot of it is kind of going to be ameliorated if you can wildcard to get these players back pretty much straight away, especially in the case of Isaac. I think you're going to want him back. I don't know who number 2 is going to be for Newcastle. Probably old slapper himself, Anthony Gordon, probably going to be the man that we're kind of going to want back. I think there's a good... when Boomer, after the game week 29, Boomer's fixture starts to look a bit ropier. I think that's kind of the time when you want to swap him over to Gordon for the good run. So maybe Isaac and Gordon, and probably not one of their defenders for the rest of the season. Probably going to be where we'll end up going. But yeah, I think Newcastle is probably not of knee-jerk to be selling them. Maybe as this week, but next week certainly go for it, because there's going to be lots of short-term games to be had by cashing in on these players. Right, the rest of the best transfers for this week. So I've already mentioned there's a lot of activity in the forward lines. Most of it by people who've blown their load very early and are now going back with their tail between their legs. You've got Daniel Munoz, Sam, a player that we've both admired quite a lot this season. I started the season with him and then sold him off fairly quickly. There are both moments where we both said to each other, "Oh yeah, no, I really need to get this guy in. He's taking up loads of positions. He's on the cusp of doing points, scored double-digit hauls, and neither of us kind of quite managed to get round to bring him in. But another player who's very much in mind, and I suppose is going to be a bit of a shoo-in for a lot of people, especially kind of game week 30 of the Saints game, and then you've got Brighton in 31, which can go either way, and then you've got it's a rubbish double, isn't it, in 32? But hey, a player like him who finds himself in the most ridiculous positions, a bit like Estepinian, a bit like Alonso, is surely a player at 5 million who offers a lot of value.
Yeah, for sure. And the fact that he's still fairly differential really helps as well. I think it's been largely situational. The fact that he has stayed so low owned has mainly been around the fact that a lot of us are looking at using transfers to get through 29, and obviously him not having a fixture that week meant that he wasn't really a player that we could comfortably use a transfer on, because I think for 3 or 4 weeks now, most of us have been saving those transfers specifically for players that will have that game in 29. But yeah, he'll be incredibly interesting very soon, especially the next 2 fixtures in 28 and 30 are incredible. I think he will miss having Mateta next to him in game week 28 if he is indeed unavailable. They have been striking up a pretty formidable relationship and partnership in the final third, and whilst he wouldn't classically be known as someone who needs to have a partnership with his centre forwards directly, I think that has actually been fairly obvious when they're playing together, that they work together as a bit of a unit, and not having Mateta there might impact him this week. Still a good fixture though, still a great player, 4 attacking returns in the last 5 as well. So no reason not to own him, unless of course you've not got the free transfers and you're plowing through 29. As soon as 29 is out of the way though, I will want him very quickly. On wildcard, he's almost a shoe-in, you would think, with the double game week. So yeah, it's just unfortunate and situational that he hasn't been owned by a lot more of us.
Yeah, I think if it transpires that Hall's out, I think Gameweek 30 versus Southampton, he might be the one that I end up going with, especially if Mateta is out. And I don't really fancy kind of getting an Eze that week. I think I probably want to save the midfield transfer for Bumo to Gordon the week after. So I think he'd be kind of the principal kind of pickup. I mean, no, Nketiah knows where the goal is and hasn't been playing in traditional sort of main man number 9 position, which is kind of what we as Arsenal fans always wanted him to go on and do. So it might be a good chance for him. Don't forget, last year he suddenly, when he got his chance, he took it for us and had like a good kind of 3 or 4 week period. And I wouldn't put it past him to do well for Palace. So if you're free hitting in 29, you want a 1 week punt, I wouldn't look any further than Nketiah, actually, personally. But yeah, I think that Munoz is definitely of great interest. Kluivert's still being brought in. Szoboszlai is being brought in as well. I don't really know where that's come from. I suppose that's just being able to removing kind of midfielders. Palmer still being sold an awful lot, but probably Gordon sales, I think, is probably where Szoboszlai being brought in as kind of comes from. Lots of forwards who are in the list. Everyone that we've discussed. So Wissa, Marmoush, Beto, Wood, all have been brought in. Yamanjao, Pedro as well. But I do want to pick up one individual who is Jared Bowen, who Paddy Power, I don't like kind of shouting at bookmakers for obvious reasons, but they did pay out on him scoring against Leicester because it was basically his goal, and to some extent it was. But in Jared Bowen, you've got a very sort of solid, consistent player at West Ham who's fortunes are on the up, a former 200 Club member, of course, and a player who I think for the next few has games which no one should really be worried about. I don't think Newcastle at home. There are some suggestions that maybe they'll be not playing at full throttle. Everton away, Wolves away in 30, and then Bournemouth and Liverpool. Not the best games after that, and then potentially a very good-looking double indeed. In 32, in 33. Sorry. So James from Planet is projecting that looks like Southampton at home and Bournemouth at Brighton away. In of itself, that could actually be the captain choice for game week 33, or at least in with a shout. I think he's on penalties again, but certainly a player who, if you do have that spot in your midfield, you don't really fancy going for Bumo at the moment, want the differential. He's a player that I've always I always enjoy watching. He kind of is, again, the epitome of talisman for West Ham. Him playing kind of quite unquote out of position up front for Graham Potter's side doesn't seem to really impact him very much. And yeah, I quite like people who are kind of thinking of or have bought Jared Bowen. He's a really nice sort of tied differential that I really wouldn't say no to. A player I've always liked. I've never really quite found the space for him this year. In years past, I've kind of had him and he's been really good for me, but I've just not found the time to do it this year.
Yeah, he's a solid runner, isn't he, in FPL? He's always consistently hitting 20 odd returns a season, maybe slightly more. I haven't gone back and checked specifically, but he does usually end up with a decent haul across the season. And this season in particular, I've never really noticed him exploding at any point. He's never really gone off on one and been in hugely great form for a medium to extended period of time, but he's still got, I think it's 13 or 14 attack and returns this year, is chugging along really nicely, and with some good fixtures to come, like you said, should be on penalties and often out of position as well. So he's consistent, he's reliable with his minutes as well on the whole, barring 1 or 2 very small injury setbacks that he's had, but I don't think that's really anything to put you off consistently. And he might be my downgrade for Palmer next week into game week 29 if I'm clever with my other transfer. So he might be a little route that I like the look of. And like you said, later on after I've wildcarded, he will be very interesting if West Ham do get that double in 32.
Yeah, I think he's been. If it does happen, he's assuming that's happened. He's been in every kind of wildcard draft I've made while kind of bored on the train home or something like that. Assuming that he gets that double in 33. But yeah, one to keep an eye on. If you do want to make a transfer this week for whatever reason in the midfield, say you're kind of finally getting rid of your Ramad, or you just think, you know what, okay, it's time for me to move on Anthony Gordon for obvious reasons, I wouldn't say no to buying Jared Bowen, basically. Cool. All right. What's next? Bold claims. Oh crap! This is terrible, Sam. Really, really bad. Our hit rate is still 18.5%, getting lower and lower by the week. I feel like we do need to start being more fast and loose with this. But yeah, it didn't go well for us last week, did it?
No, but 1 in 5 hit rate's not bad, just under. But for bold claims, these are bold. They're not meant to happen.
We were 1 in 3 last year, weren't we, or something like that?
Yeah, but maybe we weren't being bold
got
enough, because
we
a
got some
33% hit rate is a little bit too high to be bold, I would say. So I think
Right.
this is just reversion to the mean. Anyway, I will go through what I went with. I went for Palmer and Salah to get the exact same score last week. It wasn't a million miles off, but of course, no cigar for me. What about you, Tom?
Yeah, and I went for 5+ goals in Spurs versus Man City. Didn't quite turn out that way, that's for sure. I was expecting a lot
No.
more in that game. I was expecting that to be
Yeah.
very exciting. It wasn't. Maybe a sign of what's to come for Man City. Or Kusanov is looking actually fairly decent after a disastrous introduction to the Premier League. More of a refined, cultured destroyer. So yeah, one of those players I'm not going to be too worried about. But to try to make things better, Sam, what are we doing this week?
So maybe this isn't quite as bold as the last few, but I'm going for a Woods double-digit haul against Man City. Woods obviously been in great form, overperforming, so it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world, but it is against Man City. I don't think many people would expect this to happen. And a double-digit haul is, 10 points plus, so it's 2 returns minimum against Man City, against the champions. Is this bold enough, or do I have to go even further?
No, I think we'll go for that. I'm sure the bookies odds are always going to be saying, "Hey, you know what? There has to be." Man City are always going to be favoured, aren't they, in the bookies odds? So I think that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll go for that. Mine is building on the Cunha point that Wolves take no more than 5 shots versus Everton. Now, over the course of this year, Wolves have taken 301 shots, which is an average of 11 shots per game. So I think that this is perfectly feasible. It's a bit of a weird sort of small market,
It's
and then I'm
niche.
definitely watching it. It's very niche, but I'm assuming that sans Cunha, they will be sans teeth. So sans don. So I think that we'll be absolutely fine with that one. I'm just assuming that's going to be a ball draw or a 1-0 Everton with big man Beto doing the business. So yeah, that's where I'm going with this. And doubtless that's going to be a terrible, terrible outcome for me as Wolves win 3-1 after battering Everton. The Irish
30 shots on goal, Strand Larsen hat trick, yeah.
Strand Larsen, all assisted by the Irishman. Dear me. Right. Final thing to debate this week is your triple captain. I've already used mine, but yours is there. It's been in mind to potentially use in this particular game week. I don't think on Mo Salah there are any particular worries about him not starting the game. And of course, yeah, if he's taken off because the damage has been done, who's going to have done most of the damage this year? It's more unlikely to have been Mo Salah. So, on the table, as always, is the Salah goal and assist, the Death and Taxes goal and assist. Against Southampton, you'd expect that to reasonably occur.
Yeah.
Would you not be interested in just getting that and having those guaranteed points from your triple captain, Sam?
I am interested. Yeah, I do quite like it. Every time I try to think about it seriously, though, I suppose I'm always looking ahead at the doubles, and the current plan as it stands is, of course, to triple captain 32 on either Isak or potentially worst case scenario Mateta if Isak is for whatever reason injured at that point. And 2 games does usually trump 1, especially if it is Isak with 2 reasonably good games as well. But Salah, even in 60 minutes against Southampton, that could be 3 returns. And if it is 3 returns, that's a pretty decent usage of the triple captain. And it also solves another problem that I highlighted earlier on, which is if Palace lose to Fulham, then I might want to switch strategy anyway and potentially bench boost in 32, free hit 33, and then not use any chips in 34. That's one angle. And then my triple captain is kind of in the wind, up for debate anyway. So if I use it this week, I don't need to worry about trying to squeeze it into a single game week later on in the season if that 36 game week doesn't become a double. So it is on my mind. I think he will start because the league isn't wrapped up yet. They need to make sure they do a professional job on all teams. Yes, Southampton are rubbish, but Liverpool are a professional organisation and they run it like a clinic at the moment. They're not going to take silly risks. And despite the fact that there's PSG both sides, I would be extremely surprised if Salah didn't at least start the game. Like you say, though, there's a decent chance that if they're 3-0 up, 4-0 up by 60, then maybe he gets a little bit of a rest. But he's averaging 10 points a game, and he's gotten, 40 something returns this season, 43, 40, something like that. So in 60 minutes, he can easily get 2-3 returns against us. We are that bad, and right wingers especially have feasted against Southampton. So yeah, I suppose for me, the allure of a double game week is just the additional safety net of the appearance points and the potential of getting 180 minutes of an Isak or a Mateta potentially versus 60 minutes of a Salah. And you get the less appearance points automatically as well. So, yeah, I'm like maybe 20% on Salah triple, but I'm more likely than not just going to leave it and have it later on in the season.
I was just going to throw in an additional safety net is Erling Haaland versus Wolves at home in 35. Last year, April, they played Wolves at home and scored 4.
Southampton the week after.
Exactly. And so 36, maybe you want to do something else that week if things transpired, you end up kind of leaving other chips then. But you've got 2 good fixtures then when you're pretty confident that you're going to see a kind of a 90 minutes from Haaland. And if he does get taken off, he'd have done a hell of a lot of damage, wouldn't he, really? I mean, Pep's not going to let him beat Messi 6. There's no way that's going to happen. But, against Wolves or Southampton, I feel like the damage could be done, especially, if Wolves are safe by that point because the bottom 3 are just so bad. They've gone down by default. And Southampton, well, what can we say about that game in 36? They might have just downed tools entirely, you say, but they kind of already have to some extent. So, yeah, I mean, you kind of, those fixtures, if you're looking at a single, for whatever reason, do sort of appeal to me a tiny bit more. But I think that, I don't know, if we were ranking it, I think just by minutes, I think that those 2 for Haaland probably just about eclipse the Salah this week if you've got a triple captain to play with and you're using the other doubles for other chips. So if you've still got a assistant manager available, for example, maybe you're trying to manifest something around kind of the 33 double. I don't know. But it kind of feels like it's good practice maybe to just hold off for this week, even though the Southampton fixture is alluring. I don't know. I mean, does that feel kind of a bit more where you might go if you end up tripling in the single?
Yeah, I think so. I think just because we simply don't know which the doubles will be and where they'll fall just yet, it just gives me enough pause for thought that I might as well just leave it for now, and then something might present itself later on in the season that if I used it on a 60-70 minute Salah, and look, he might get 90, we don't know that, and it's just speculation, and if he does get 90, I might wish I used it on him, but I don't think he'll be highly triple captain this week regardless. And I think the potential upside of using it in a double game week is enough that it makes me want to wait, knowing that worst case scenario, I can still use it on a pretty handy single later on in the season when I've got more information. So yeah, I would like to do it, but I think there just might be enough temptation later on in the season to make more sense then rather than now.
Yeah, but you can't begrudge anybody. If you do have the conviction about it this week, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it could be a cricket score. Yeah, and he could play 90. We don't know. So, yeah, no problem with it.
I think it's incontrovertible just to cover it off that he's the captain this week, right? I mean, I can completely see why some people might be like, oh, you know what, Palmer's definitely putting on blind data against Southampton. Leicester could be the week, and sure, it could be. I mean, it could have been so say Palmer, to use your example earlier on of kind of just flipping things around. If Palmer was the one who got an assist last week and Salah was the one who blanked, maybe there'd be more people kind of think, oh, you know what, I might chance it on Palmer actually. And the game against Leicester is a game that is a very good game really for any kind of team attacking. So is that one that you were looking at maybe as well? I don't know. I've not really thought about it, to be honest, just because Salah is so obvious. But there are a few intrepid managers out there, especially if you're kind of still stuck around the millions or 500Ks. I mean, this is a really good opportunity to take him on, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think regardless of what Salah or Palmer did in game week 27, I don't know if you saw this, Tom. I'm pretty sure you did. There was a rather popular long post that went out on X the day before the Palmer
Oh, I
fixture.
don't know who wrote that.
It was some dickhead, but he might have gone slightly viral talking about how bad Southampton are and got way too much attention for it. And all I'd say there is all of those things that I wrote, I'm the dickhead, that all still ring true for Southampton in game week 28. And as bad as Leicester have been, and they have been bad recently, no question about it, we have got almost half the points of Leicester. And we have properly down tools. Leicester are still in the fight to get out of the relegation zone. They're most likely to go down, of course, but they do at least still have a hope. Southampton don't. And there's a pretty decent reason to just throw all of your resources at captaining players and having players up against Southampton. Leicester are bad, fine. Palmer's not a bad shout either. And you might be able to get a bit of positive variance there. But I think whilst last week the fixture was on Palmer's side pretty majorly, I would say this week it is on Salah's side, and he's got the data, he's got the form, he's got everything else. So I think there's enough now going for Salah over Palmer that it makes it a clear choice for me this week.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But if you are again chasing, really chasing, I wouldn't say no to taking the opportunity. Because you've got nothing to lose and you've got everything to gain. Sure, I can completely see why you might want to do that. Cool. All right. So just to round off our team and plans for the week ahead. This looks like your team. It is your team. So Cunha for Woods and playing Robinson if Hall's out. Are you?
Yeah, so I although I've got injury doubts in my side, I think I'm fairly fortunate. I've got 2 free transfers, and the player I'm looking at bringing in would also have to be someone that helps me in game week 29. So I don't need to make a transfer necessarily. I could just play João Pedro ahead of Cunha, bench Cunha, and I could just have Hall starting, which I do plan on doing. And then if he doesn't, then Robinson away at Brighton isn't the worst in the world. I will take that. That's fine. I don't think it's worth a transfer for me. And therefore an extra hit next week as well. So any transfer I make here basically commits me to a -4, as long as it's not a player that I desperately need for next week anyway. So Cunha to Wood, I think if I decide that Wood has higher upside or higher potential than João Pedro at home to Fulham, I think I will do that. I think I will get that sorted. And mainly because Isak is in my starting 11, there is a doubt there. And then if I maybe get a bit unlucky and Isak doesn't play the game week 28 fixture, I think he will. But if he doesn't, then I've still got João Pedro as that ace up my sleeve on the bench to come on whilst I'm already playing Chris Wood. So I think I'm going to make that transfer at least. There are a couple of other strikers, Wissa, Beto, that I like, but I think Wood just about edges it for me. The rest is pretty much obvious. Salah captain, Palmer, Kluivert, Semenyo, and Burmo in the middle. Gabriel, Alexander-Arnold in defence alongside Hall, who again could be Robinson if he's ruled out. And then Pickford in goal away at Wolves, who hopefully will be blunt, like you said, for your bold claim.
Yep, cool. Nice one. So I am probably going to go without Chris Woods for this week, and I think from talking it through tonight, I feel like I'm going to end up rolling it. So I obviously with Cunha on my bench, Hall out injured, I've got good cover. So Mikalenko, who I've had for yonks since game week 6, can come on for this week. I think that's absolutely fine. I've got Kirkez on the bench at the moment. I'm playing Dango over him, just hoping that what Tom FPL sponsor is correct, and I've got no reason to kind of doubt that. I also think that with Zabani out and a few injuries for Bournemouth, I don't know if Christie's going to be back, for example. That Kirk's on the bench absolutely fine, and obviously he's there to come in if Isak doesn't play. So I think one playing the player on the bench is absolutely fine for this week. So I think I'm going to just roll it over, see what happens. I can always still go to Chris Wood next week if I decide, hey, you know what, I'm not going to bother with Haaland, but I feel like I want to take that chance here. It does mean going against Chris Woods, but I don't really see a way with Marmoush in situ. I don't have that opportunity to go there and also get Haaland. There's no way I can do that without a -8 next week, which does feel kind of pretty unpalatable, actually. So yeah, I think it might be a case of obviously depending on what happens in Europe, batten down the hatches this week. But I would not be shocked 1-0 to Sam if we do find something completely game-changing happening in Europe. You know, Gabriel comes out of the game tonight and he's done something. I hope he hasn't touched wood, or something like that, or you know, God forbid something happens to Salah. I mean, I would not be surprised if there's another curveball, which seems to be this season's sort of watchword, really. But yeah, maybe just kind of hold fast this week, back down the hatches and see what happens next. Does kind of feel kind of the right way to go for me, just because there's that route open to have Haaland now, which wasn't there before with Cunha. So can't make the transfer this week. No way, because that hinges on selling Palmer. Can't do that this week with the Leicester game. But after that, as I've kind of copied myself up to in the fall, I think after this kind of game week 29, I think he is sellable. And I think that he will be the route to buying in Haaland for the back-to-back home fixtures. So yeah, looking to roll it basically at the moment. But that could change. Maybe I could kind of have an epiphany and think, yeah, I need to get Chris Woods, which probably arguably I should have had about 20 weeks ago. But if it hasn't come now, I'm sure it may not come. Maybe it won't come at all this year. But yeah, feeling okay for this week. I'm, again, as always, eternally just wishing that Chris Woods would just disappear off the face of the earth. Don't wish injury on any player, etc., and so on and so on. Right. Well, I think that's everything for this week. But yeah, remember what I said about FPL meets, and I really hope some of you can come along on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm very jealous. I wish I was there, and hope you guys enjoy having a drink at the Thirsty Bear, and say hi to Tom if you get the chance. I will be there in game week 38. Do not worry. In the meantime, though, thank you all so much for listening. It was a really enjoyable show today. Thoroughly enjoyed this one, and helped me map out my thinking as well. So thank you all so much for joining in on that. We were Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Blue Sky at WGTA, or myself at FPL Pricey, on Twitter, or now known as X, at WGTA_FPL, or again FPL Pricey on there. Instagram and Threads is WGTA.FPL, FPL Pricey on there as well. And if you did enjoy the pod, if you could give us a follow on those channels, that'd be fantastic. But also if you could give the pod a 5-star rating wherever you're listening, and leaving a like, hitting subscribe on YouTube would also be greatly appreciated. Thank you all so much.
Yep, thanks so much for listening. I hope this assisted you think about which forwards to buy in the not so forgotten game week 28. Next week, we'll be joined by a friend of the pods, Sai, aka FPL Analytic, once more to discuss chip use this season and how the interplay of analytics should be a really, really interesting show. We will see you next Tuesday.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.